Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we will be discussing a data breach that has mostly flown under the radar, but despite this is probably one of the largest breaches ever of personal data. And even though this is probably one of the largest data breaches ever, it's with a company you've also probably never heard of before. This company is called Jericho Pictures Inc., which sounds like a film production company or maybe a photography company, but they actually do business as National Public Data, which is what I'll be referring to them as for the sake of this episode, and the business they do is background checks. Now, if you're employed, you've probably had a background check done. There's multiple different companies that do them, and there's a lot of data collected in the process to make sure that you are who you say you are, and that you haven't committed any serious crimes. This data includes records like your full name, your address, and any previous addresses you've lived at, your social security number, and possibly other policing records depending on the company or the extent of the background check. In terms of sheer numbers, an estimated 2.9 billion people were affected, and the data was being sold on the deep web by a group called USDOD, who are seeking $3.5 million for the dataset. The records listed in the database include first, last, and middle names, date of birth, addresses for the past 30 years, phone numbers, and social security numbers. The combination of your full name, date of birth, address, and social security number makes you especially vulnerable to identity theft, which can be used to commit a number of other crimes like credit card fraud, which can both socially and financially ruin someone's life. It can also lead to additional trouble when you're trying to legitimately open something like a credit card as well. Given the numbers, it's likely that both people from in and out of the United States were impacted. But believe it or not, it gets even more concerning. National Public Data performs background checks by doing something called data scraping. Data scraping is when a program extracts large amounts of data automatically from different websites. This is not an uncommon practice, but it can be controversial and is also usually not the best method to gather large amounts of data because it's not typically natively supported by the sites that data is scraped from. If it were natively supported, utilizing something like an API would be preferable. Still, scraping data can provide valuable analytics, and most of the time it is from publicly available sources, so it should theoretically be free game, even though it's not necessarily wanted by website owners. Data scraping can be mitigated through the use of rate-limiting web requests, which only allows so many interactions to happen in a certain time frame, and that will greatly slow down any scraping tools. You can also use inconsistent HTML formatting so that the bot is confused when it's trying to pull the data, or using CAPTCHAs to ensure that only a human is interacting with the page. National Public Data using data scraping is really not that surprising to me. I would actually expect this from a similar organization. Where it enters potentially illegal territory is that the data in this breach was scraped from non-public sources, not public sources. The victims did not knowingly provide their data to National Public Data, nor was this data already public. It's no secret that many websites these days are collecting a ton of your data, and if you really read through the terms of service, it's pretty surprising what you agree to have collected about you, and what you agree to have sold to third parties that you don't even know exist. It's unfortunately a pretty big problem with the modern-day web. And I personally would really like to see some legislation in the US similar to the GDPR to protect people using websites from unknowingly having their data collected in ways they don't understand. People who want to conduct background checks using National Public Data simply search through their massive collection of scraped data on individuals. And those individuals have no idea that this company they've never even heard of has their data. This all came to light in a class action lawsuit that started with a plaintiff in California who was notified about the breach. You may assume he was notified about the breach by National Public Data, but it actually was not. As of the date of this recording, they haven't notified the victims. It was actually his Identity Theft Protection Service that notified him that his data was being sold on the deep web. And, well, from there it was discovered he was definitely far from the only person this was happening to. As part of the lawsuit, this specific plaintiff is asking that the court require National Public Data to purge the personal information of all the impacted victims, and to implement better cybersecurity practices like encrypting all collected data, implementing a threat management program, and have a third party perform an evaluation of their cybersecurity practices and frameworks at least every 10 years. If and when a data breach notification arrives, it will likely be via the mail. But like with every breach, this also gives attackers an opportunity to perform phishing attacks against victims. This is especially risky because most people have no idea what National Public Data's email formats are, or what to even look for in a phishing email. Scammers could send fake data breach notification emails and try to sell you a fake identity protection service. Someone who's already panicked due to this type of breach may not be thinking clearly and miss signs of phishing, which would then only put them in a worse position. Carefully read every email you may get related to this breach, and if you're not sure if it's legit or not, ask someone, get another pair of eyes on it. Thank you to Bloomberg News, Tom's Guide, and Malwarebytes for information on this data breach, as well as the implications. And of course, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime. And until next time, stay secure.